The Sunday morning sun hadn't yet burned away the fog rolling through San Francisco, California, when Nathan Cole first tasted heaven in the form of apple pie, delivered by trembling hands that belonged to the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. It was the spring of 1872, and Nathan had been working the docks for 3 months since arriving from Wyoming, where he'd spent the better part of his 24 years breaking horses and herding cattle across endless plains. The work here was different, harder in some ways, loading ships and hauling cargo, but San Francisco offered something the open range never could: anonymity and a chance to start fresh after a cattle drive gone wrong had left him seeking new horizons. He'd taken a room above the saloon on Market Street, spending his Sundays at the small boarding house where Mrs. Henderson served meals to working men who had no families of their own. That particular Sunday, Mrs. Henderson had apologized profusely that her usual cook was ill, but the baker's daughter from down the street had kindly offered to provide dessert. When Juliet Zimmerman walked through the door carrying a pie that smelled like cinnamon and butter and something indefinably perfect, Nathan had looked up from his coffee and felt his heart stop in his chest. She was perhaps 20 years old, with dark hair pinned carefully beneath a simple bonnet and eyes the color of warm honey. Her dress was modest, pale blue cotton that had been mended carefully at the hem, and there was a dusting of flour on her left cheek that she seemed unaware of. When she smiled politely at the room full of rough men, Nathan saw 2 of the dock workers elbow each other and grin, but she kept her gaze lowered as she set the pie on the sideboard. "Miss Zimmerman made this herself," Mrs. Henderson announced. "Her father owns the bakery on 3rd Street. "Isn't that kind of her?" "Very kind," Nathan heard himself say, surprising himself by speaking at all. He wasn't typically one for unnecessary words. Juliet glanced up briefly, her eyes meeting his for just a moment, and he saw something flicker across her face. Surprise, perhaps, or curiosity. Then she was looking away again, murmuring something about needing to return to help her father with the afternoon baking. The pie was even better than it smelled. The crust was perfectly flaky, the apples tender but not mushy, sweetened just enough and spiced with cinnamon and what might have been a touch of nutmeg. Nathan ate his slice slowly, savoring every bite, and found himself thinking about those honey-colored eyes long after the meal was finished. The following Sunday, she came again. This time it was a cherry pie, the fruit deep red and tart sweet, the juice staining the golden crust. Nathan made sure to be early to dinner, taking the seat closest to the sideboard where she set down her offering. He thanked her directly this time, and she rewarded him with a small smile that made his pulse quicken. "You're welcome, Mr." She began, the question implicit. "Cole, Nathan Cole. Most folks just call me Nathan." "Mr. Cole, then," she said, a hint of amusement in her voice. "I hope you enjoy it." "I'm certain I will. Last week's was the best pie I've ever tasted." A flush of pleasure colored her cheeks. "You're very kind to say so." Before he could respond, she was gone again, disappearing into the San Francisco streets with their cable cars and crowds and endless noise. Nathan ate the cherry pie and thought it might be even better than the apple, though perhaps that was simply because he now knew the name of the woman who had made it. This became their pattern through the spring and into the summer. Every Sunday, without fail, Juliet Zimmerman would arrive at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house with a pie. Apple, cherry, peach, blackberry, strawberry, rhubarb. Sometimes custard pies, rich with eggs and cream, flavored with vanilla or chocolate. Each one was a masterpiece, and Nathan found himself living for Sundays, for that brief moment when he could see her, exchange a few words, watch the way she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, or bit her lower lip when she was concentrating on setting down the pie just so. He learned things about her slowly, piecing together details from their brief conversations and from what Mrs. Henderson shared. Juliet's mother had died 5 years ago when Juliet was only 15, leaving her to help her father run the bakery. Jakob Zimmerman had come to California from Germany in the gold rush days, finding his fortune not in the mines but in feeding hungry miners. He was a kind man but strict, protective of his only daughter, and Juliet spent most of her time either in the bakery or at home, with little opportunity for socializing. "She's a good girl," Mrs. Henderson told Nathan one afternoon when he'd stopped by to drop off his rent money. "Works hard, never complains. Her father depends on her something fierce since her mother passed. Some of the young men in town have tried courting her, but old Jakob sends them packing. Says they're not serious enough, not established enough. I think he's just afraid of being left alone." Nathan had nodded, filing this information away carefully. He understood protective fathers. He understood hard work and loss. And he was beginning to understand that what he felt for Juliet Zimmerman was far more than simple attraction. By August, he had worked his way up to a better position on the docks, supervising cargo loading and earning enough to move into a small but respectable room in a proper boarding house. He saved his money carefully, spent his evenings learning to read better by lamplight, and his Sundays waiting for a glimpse of the woman who was slowly, surely, capturing his heart. One Sunday in late August, when she arrived with a peach pie that smelled like sunshine, Nathan gathered his courage and spoke more than he usually did. "Miss Zimmerman, I wonder if I might ask you something." She looked up at him, those honey eyes curious. "Of course, Mr. Cole." "Your pies are remarkable, truly, I've been thinking." He paused, suddenly uncertain but pushed forward. "Well, I've been thinking that I'd like to learn to make something so fine. Would you ever consider sharing your recipes?" It was a bold request, he knew. Bakers guarded their recipes jealously, and he was essentially a stranger. But Juliet didn't seem offended. Instead, she tilted her head thoughtfully. "That's an unusual request from a dock worker," she said, but her tone was gentle, not mocking. "Do you bake, Mr. Cole?" "No, madam, but I'd like to learn. A man ought to know how to feed himself properly, don't you think? And besides—" He hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "I'd like to understand what goes into making something so perfect." She studied him for a long moment, and Nathan had the distinct impression he was being measured somehow, weighed against some invisible standard. Finally, she smiled. "Tell you what, Mr. Cole, if you're serious about learning, you could come by the bakery some morning, early before we open. I could show you some of the basics, but I warn you, baking is harder than it looks." "I'm up every morning before dawn anyway," Nathan said, trying to keep the eagerness from his voice. "I'd be grateful for the lesson." "Tuesday morning then, 5 o'clock. Do you know where Zimmerman's bakery is?" "3rd Street. I'll be there." She smiled again, and this time it reached her eyes, lighting them with warmth. "I'll look forward to it, Mr. Cole." After she left, Nathan could barely concentrate on his meal. The other men ribbed him about his obvious interest, but he took it good-naturedly. Let them tease. He had an invitation to see Juliet Zimmerman outside of these Sunday dinners, and that felt like winning something precious. Tuesday morning arrived wrapped in the typical San Francisco fog, thick and damp, muffling the sounds of the city. Nathan dressed carefully in his cleanest clothes and made his way through the empty streets to 3rd Street, where Zimmerman's bakery stood dark and shuttered. For a moment, he worried he'd misunderstood, that she hadn't really meant the invitation. Then the door opened, spilling warm yellow lamplight onto the wooden sidewalk, and Juliet appeared. "Right on time," she said, stepping back to let him in. I appreciate punctuality. The bakery was warm, the ovens already heating, filling the space with a dry, comfortable heat that smelled faintly of yeast and sugar. Nathan had never been inside before, and he looked around with interest. The front room was simple, with a long counter and shelves that would display the day's goods. Through a doorway, he could see the work area, with large wooden tables, mixing bowls, and the massive brick ovens that were the heart of any bakery. "My father won't be down for another hour," Juliet said, untying her shawl and hanging it on a peg. "He handles the bread mostly and the morning rolls. I do the pastries and pies. We divide the work." She had already changed into her work dress, a simple gray thing with an apron over it, and her hair was braided and pinned up securely. Without her bonnet, Nathan could see more of her face, the delicate curve of her jaw, the way her eyebrows arched expressively when she talked. "So," she said, moving to one of the work tables where ingredients were already laid out, "we'll start simple. A basic pie crust, that's the foundation of everything." For the next 2 hours, Nathan learned that Juliet had been absolutely right. Baking was harder than it looked. Under her patient instruction, he measured flour and salt, cut cold butter into the dry ingredients with a pastry blender, and tried to achieve the right consistency of mixture that looked like coarse crumbs. His hands were too warm, Juliet explained, and the butter kept melting too much. "You have to work quickly," she said, demonstrating again with her own bowl. Her movements were efficient, practiced, the result of years of repetition. "The butter needs to stay cold so the crust will be flaky. If it melts into the flour before baking, you'll have a tough crust instead." Nathan tried again, working faster this time, and Juliet nodded approvingly. "Better. Now we add just enough water to bring it together. Not too much or it will be tough, just enough." She sprinkled ice water over the mixture with her fingertips, then showed him how to gently press it together until it formed a shaggy dough. "Now we rest it. The dough needs to rest in the cold room for at least 30 minutes before we roll it out." While the dough rested, she set him to work peeling and slicing apples, showing him the right thickness for the slices, the way to toss them with sugar and spices so each piece was evenly coated. Her father came down as they were working, a big, bearded man with kind eyes and flour permanently embedded in the creases of his hands. "Papa, this is Nathan Cole. I'm teaching him to make pie," Juliet said in German, then repeated in English for Nathan's benefit. Jakob Zimmerman looked Nathan up and down with the same measuring gaze his daughter had used. "A dock worker wants to learn baking?" he asked, his accent thick but his English clear. "Yes, sir. Your daughter makes the finest pies I've ever tasted. Seemed worth learning from the best." The older man grunted, but Nathan thought he saw approval in his eyes. "My Juliet is a fine baker, better than me with the pastries. She has her mother's touch." His expression softened with old grief. "You work hard, young man." "Yes, sir, every day, good. Hard work is good." Jakob nodded once, then moved to his own work area and began hauling out massive bags of flour for the morning's bread. Juliet caught Nathan's eye and gave him a small, encouraging smile. He realized he'd just passed some kind of test. They worked together through the morning, and Nathan found himself entranced not just by Juliet herself, but by watching her work. She moved with unconscious grace, her hands sure and skilled as she kneaded dough for Danish pastries, rolled out crusts to perfect circles, crimped edges with practiced twists of her fingers. She talked as she worked, explaining the why behind each step, the chemistry and art that combine to create perfection. "Baking is like. It's like a conversation between you and the ingredients," she said at one point, checking the temperature of the ovens with the practiced wave of a hand near the opening. You have to listen to what they're telling you. Is the dough too sticky? It needs more flour. Is the crust shrinking? You worked it too hard. Everything has a reason, a cause and effect. You really love this, Nathan observed, watching her face light up as she talked. I do, she admitted. Some people think it's just women's work, just cooking, but it's more than that. It's creation. Every morning we start with basic ingredients: flour, butter, eggs, sugar, and we create something that brings people joy. That feeds them, sustains them. There's something holy about that, I think. Nathan understood exactly what she meant. It was the same feeling he used to get working with horses. That sense of taking something wild and raw and shaping it into something purposeful and good through patience and skill and respect. By the time his own pie went into the oven, the morning was well advanced and the bakery was open for business, with customers coming and going in a steady stream. Nathan watched Juliet transform from the focused baker to the friendly shopkeeper, smiling and chatting with the regular customers, carefully wrapping purchases in paper, counting out change with quick efficiency. When his pie finally came out of the oven, golden and bubbling, Nathan felt a surge of pride unlike anything he'd experienced in years. It wasn't perfect, the crust was a bit uneven, and he'd crimped the edges clumsily, but it was his, made with his own hands under Juliet's patient teaching. That's good for a first try, she said, examining it with a critical but kind eye. The crust got a nice color, and I can see the butter made good layers. You'll have to let it cool and then taste it to see if the filling is seasoned right. Thank you, Nathan said, and he meant it with his whole heart, for taking the time to teach me. I know you're busy. It was my pleasure, Juliet replied, and the way she looked at him made Nathan's breath catch. You're a good student, patient, careful, willing to learn. Those are rare qualities. Would you? Nathan started, then paused, gathering his courage. Would you be willing to teach me again? I don't want to impose, but I'd like to learn more. I could come early in the mornings before my shift at the docks. I wouldn't get in the way. Juliet glanced toward her father, who was helping a customer but was certainly within earshot. Nathan saw her bite her lip, considering, and he held his breath. I think that would be acceptable, she said finally. Tuesday and Thursday mornings, if you can manage it. We could work through the basic pastries, and I could teach you bread on the days you come. I'll be here, Nathan promised. Thank you, Miss Zimmerman, truly. You can call me Juliet, she said softly, if we're going to be working together. Then you should call me Nathan. She smiled, and Nathan felt the warmth of it all the way through. Very well, Nathan. I'll see you Thursday morning. He left the bakery with his misshapen pie wrapped carefully in paper, his clothes dusted with flour and his heart soaring higher than it had in years. On his walk to the docks, he passed Mrs. Henderson on the street and showed her his handiwork. Well, well, she said, eyes twinkling. You're serious about this baking business, aren't you? Yes, madam, I am. Or is it the baker's daughter you're serious about? She asked shrewdly. Nathan felt heat rise to his face but didn't deny it. She's remarkable, he said simply. Mrs. Henderson patted his arm. She is indeed, but be careful, Nathan. Jakob Zimmerman is protective of that girl, and he has reason to be. There have been men before who showed interest, but none of them were deemed suitable. He won't let just anyone court his daughter. I'm not just anyone, Nathan said quietly. And I'm not playing games. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. The older woman studied him for a moment, then nodded. I believe you. Good luck, son. I think you'll need it. Thursday morning, Nathan arrived at the bakery at 5 o'clock sharp, and Juliet met him with a smile and an apron. This time they made bread, and Nathan learned the meditative rhythm of kneading, the way the dough changed under his hands from sticky and rough to smooth and elastic. He learned to shape loaves, to score the tops so they would expand properly in the oven, to judge when they were perfectly baked by the hollow sound they made when tapped. Jakob joined them after a while, showing Nathan the proper technique for stretching dough, his big hands surprisingly gentle as he demonstrated. The old baker said little, but Nathan sensed he was being evaluated again, measured against standards that were never explicitly stated. Over the following weeks, as summer faded toward autumn, the Tuesday and Thursday morning lessons became the highlight of Nathan's week, rivaled only by Sunday dinners when Juliet arrived with her pie. He learned to make croissants, their layers upon layers of butter and dough requiring patience and precision. He learned Danish pastries, cream puffs, tarts filled with fruit or custard. His hands grew more skilled, more confident, and Juliet praised his progress. But more than the baking, Nathan treasured the time with Juliet herself. In the quiet hours of the early morning, with just the two of them working side by side, she opened up in ways she couldn't during the busy day. She told him about her mother, who had taught her to bake starting when she was barely tall enough to reach the work table. She spoke of her love for San Francisco, despite its rough edges, and her dreams of maybe one day having her own pastry shop, something smaller and more specialized than her father's general bakery. "Papa would never understand," she said one morning in September as they worked together on a batch of apple turnovers. "He's built this business from nothing, and he expects me to carry it on. And I will. I love him and I owe him that. But sometimes I dream of something different." "What stops you from trying?" Nathan asked, carefully folding the pastry dough around the apple filling the way she'd shown him. "Everything. Money mostly, and I couldn't leave Papa alone. And, well, it's not really done, is it? A woman running her own business. People talk." "People always talk," Nathan observed. "Doesn't mean you have to listen." She smiled at him, a real smile that made her eyes light up. "Is that what you did? Stop listening to people?" Nathan nodded slowly. "Back in Wyoming, I was supposed to take over my father's ranch. It's what everyone expected. But after my parents died in a fever outbreak, I realized I didn't want that life. So I sold the land and came here. People back home thought I was crazy, throwing away good land for uncertain work in a city. But it was the right choice for me. Do you miss it?" "The ranching, sometimes. I miss the open spaces, the quiet. But I don't miss the isolation or the expectation that I'd live someone else's dream instead of my own." He paused, then added quietly, "And if I'd stayed, I never would have met you." Juliet's hands stilled in their work, and she looked up at him with an expression Nathan couldn't quite read. They stood there in the warm bakery, flour dusting both their clothes, and something shifted in the air between them. It was Jakob's voice from the front room, calling for Juliet to help with a customer, that broke the moment. As October arrived, bringing cooler weather and the first hints of rain, Nathan realized he was falling in love. Not the sudden, overwhelming passion he'd heard described in songs and stories, but something deeper and more solid. It was built on morning conversations and shared work, on watching Juliet's face light up when a recipe turned out perfectly, on the way she laughed at his clumsy attempts to pipe decorative frosting, on the careful way she showed him techniques over and over without impatience. He loved her competence, her skill, the way her hands moved with such surety and grace. He loved her kindness to customers, especially the poorest ones who sometimes couldn't afford much but were never made to feel lesser. He loved the way she talked about her dreams with a mixture of hope and pragmatism. He loved the small gap between her front teeth that showed when she really smiled, and the way she hummed while she worked, old German songs her mother had taught her. And he was almost certain she felt something for him too. He saw it in the way she looked for him on Sunday mornings, the small smile that appeared when he walked in the way she found excuses to stand close to him while they worked, guiding his hands through a complicated technique. In the way she lingered sometimes after their lessons were done, talking about everything and nothing while the morning light strengthened outside the bakery windows. But Nathan was cautious. He understood that what he wanted, a future with Juliet, would require Jakob Zimmerman's blessing, and he wasn't sure he'd earned that yet. So he continued to show up faithfully every Tuesday and Thursday morning, learning everything Juliet would teach him, proving through consistency and dedication that he was serious. On Sundays, he continued to attend Mrs. Henderson's dinners, savoring both the pie and the few moments he could spend talking with Juliet. The Sunday before Thanksgiving, Juliet arrived with a pumpkin pie spiced with cinnamon and ginger, the filling smooth and rich in its perfect golden crust. When she set it down, Nathan noticed she seemed nervous, her hands trembling slightly. "Is everything all right?" he asked quietly, stepping closer. "Yes, Nathan, could I speak with you privately?" His heart jumped into his throat, but he kept his expression calm. "Of course." She led him to the boarding house's small back porch, away from the other diners. The November morning was cool, the fog thick, muffling the city sounds. Juliet wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders and turned to face him. "I need to tell you something," she began, her voice soft but steady. "There's been a man, a baker's son from Sacramento, who's been corresponding with my father. He wants to merge our bakeries, and part of his proposal includes marrying me." Nathan felt like he'd been punched in the stomach, but he forced himself to stay quiet to let her finish. "My father is considering it. It would be a good business arrangement, and this man is established, successful. Everything Papa thinks is important." She took a breath. "Papa told me about it last week. He says I should be practical, that I'm already 20 years old and need to think about my future." "What do you want?" Nathan asked, his voice rough. Juliet looked up at him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I want Nathan, these past months have been the happiest I've been since my mother died. Working with you, teaching you, talking with you. You listen to me, really listen, not just to what I say, but to what I mean. You understand about dreams and about duty. You work hard and you're kind, and you never once made me feel like I was less because I'm a woman with opinions and skills." "Juliet," he started, but she held up a hand. "Please, let me finish. I need to say this." She took another breath. "I think I'm falling in love with you, Nathan Cole. Maybe I already have fallen, and I need to know if you feel anything similar, because if you do, then I need to tell my father that I can't marry this man from Sacramento. But if you don't, if I'm just a friend to you, or if you're not interested in marriage, then I need to know that too. Because I have to make a decision soon." Nathan's heart was pounding so hard he was certain she could hear it. He stepped closer, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her honey-colored eyes, close enough to smell the cinnamon and vanilla that always seemed to cling to her clothes. "Juliet, I've been in love with you since the first Sunday I saw you walk through Mrs. Henderson's door with an apple pie. Every Tuesday and Thursday morning I've shown up not just to learn baking, though I do love that, but because being near you is the best part of my day, of my week, of my life." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. It was small and strong, calloused from hard work, and it fit perfectly in his. "I want to marry you. I want to build a life with you. I don't have much right now, just my wages from the docks and some savings, but I work hard and I'll keep working hard. I'll do whatever it takes to give you the life you deserve." A tear slipped down her cheek, but she was smiling. "I don't need much. I just need someone who loves me for who I am, not for what I can do for their business or their family. Someone who sees me, really sees me. I see you, Nathan said softly. You're the strongest, most capable, most beautiful woman I've ever known. And I swear to you, if you'll have me, I'll spend every day of my life making sure you never regret it. Then yes, Juliet whispered. Yes, I'll marry you, but Nathan, we have to tell my father, and he might not agree, he might forbid it. Then I'll talk to him, today if you'll let me. I'll prove to him that I'm worthy of you. Juliet squeezed his hand. You already are, but Papa is stubborn and he has very fixed ideas about what makes a suitable husband. You'll need to be prepared for that. I am, Nathan assured her. I've been preparing for this since the first day you let me into your bakery. They stood there for a moment longer, hands clasped, and then Nathan did something he'd been dreaming about for months. He leaned down and kissed her, gentle and reverent, and when she kissed him back, he felt like every good thing he'd ever done in his life had led him to this moment. When they returned inside, Nathan could barely eat, even though the pumpkin pie was delicious. All he could think about was the conversation ahead with Jakob Zimmerman. After the meal ended and Juliet prepared to leave, Nathan stood. Sir, he said, addressing Jakob, who had accompanied his daughter that day, something he rarely did. Might I walk you and your daughter back to the bakery? There's something I'd like to discuss with you. The old baker studied him with those sharp, assessing eyes. Is there now? Yes, sir. It's important. Jakob looked between Nathan and Juliet, and Nathan saw understanding dawn on the older man's face. His expression became stern, but he nodded. Very well. Come along. The walk back to the bakery was tense and quiet. Juliet walked between them, her hand tucked into her father's arm, but she kept glancing at Nathan with encouraging looks. When they reached the bakery, Jakob unlocked the door and gestured for Nathan to follow them inside. Juliet, go upstairs, Jakob said in German, then English. I will speak with this young man alone. Papa, please listen to him, Juliet said, her voice pleading. Really listen. I will do what I think best for you, now go. She hesitated, but finally obeyed, though not before giving Nathan one last worried look. Nathan heard her footsteps on the stairs leading to the apartment above the bakery where she and her father lived, and then it was just him and Jakob Zimmerman in the quiet, dim bakery. The older man walked to the work area and sat heavily on one of the stools, gesturing for Nathan to take another. For a long moment he said nothing, just looked at Nathan with an expression that was hard to read. You want to marry my daughter, Jakob finally said. It wasn't a question. Yes, sir, I do. Why should I let you? You're a dock worker with no prospects, no property, no family name. I have a baker from Sacramento who wants to marry her. Established business, good family, future security. Why would I choose you instead? Nathan had expected this. He'd spent weeks thinking about what he would say if given the chance. Because I love her, sir. Not her skills, not what she can do for my career or my business, but her, who she is. I love the way she lights up when a recipe turns out perfectly. I love her kindness and her strength. I love her dreams, even the ones that scare her. I would spend every day working to make her happy, to support her goals, to be the partner she deserves. Love, Jakob said, his voice heavy with skepticism. Love fades. Love doesn't pay bills or put food on the table or secure the future. You're right that love alone isn't enough, Nathan agreed. That's why I also offer hard work, dedication, and a willingness to learn. I've been learning your trade these past months, not because I want to take over your bakery, but because I wanted to understand the world Juliet lives in. I wanted to be able to talk with her about her passion, to help if needed. And I've discovered I'm good at it, sir. I have a knack for baking and I work hard. So you want my bakery after all, Jakob said, his tone hardening. No, sir, I want your daughter's happiness. If that means working here, I'd be honored. If it means continuing at the dock so she can focus on the bakery, I'll do that. If it means starting something new together, a partnership where her skills can really shine, I'd support that too. I don't have a fixed idea of what our life has to be. I just know I want her in it, and I want whatever makes her happiest. Jakob was quiet for a long time, his weathered hands clasped in front of him. My Juliet is all I have left of her mother. Did she tell you that? Yes, sir. Her mother was. She was everything. When she died, I thought I would die too. But Juliet needed me, so I kept going. She has her mother's talent, her mother's heart. I cannot bear the thought of her being unhappy, of her being with someone who doesn't appreciate what a treasure she is. I do appreciate it, sir. More than I can express. This baker from Sacramento, he sees a business opportunity, a way to expand, to grow his enterprise. He would give Juliet security, yes, but he would also expect her to be a good wife, to help with his business on his terms, to put aside her own dreams for his success. I know this because I know men like him. I was like him once before I met my wife. Jakob's eyes grew distant with memory. She taught me that life is more than success and security, that happiness matters, that dreams matter, that love, real love, is worth more than gold. Nathan waited, hardly daring to breathe. You have been coming to my bakery for 3 months now, Jakob continued. Every Tuesday and Thursday before dawn, never late, never making excuses. I have watched you work. You are patient, careful. You listen when Juliet teaches you. You don't act like you already know everything like so many men do. You ask questions. You admit mistakes. You try again when you fail. Your daughter is an excellent teacher, sir. She is. But not everyone can be taught. You have to be willing to learn, and you are. Jakob fixed Nathan with a penetrating stare. But more than that, I have watched how you look at her. Like she is the sun and the moon and the stars. Like you cannot quite believe your good fortune in knowing her. That is how I looked at her mother. That is how a man should look at the woman he loves. Hope began to bloom in Nathan's chest, but he kept silent, letting Jakob work through his thoughts. I will make you a deal, the baker said finally. I will give you my blessing to court my daughter properly. You will come to dinner here, on Sunday evenings after we close the bakery. You will spend time with us as a family. You will let me get to know you better, and I will let you show me what kind of man you truly are. If after 3 months I am satisfied that you can provide for her and make her happy, you may ask for her hand officially. And if, after 3 months, I do ask and you approve, then Juliet makes the final decision, Nathan said carefully. Not me, not you. I need to know that she has the freedom to choose. Jakob's eyebrows rose. You would risk that she might choose differently. If she's not free to choose, then what kind of marriage would it be? I want her whole heart, freely given, not forced by duty or pressure. For the first time, Jakob smiled, just a small curve of his mouth beneath his beard, but a smile nonetheless. You are either very wise or very foolish, Nathan Cole. Perhaps both. Very well. Juliet will have the freedom to choose, though I think I already know what her choice will be. He stood and extended his hand. We have an agreement. Prove yourself worthy of my daughter. Nathan stood and shook the older man's hand firmly. Thank you, sir. I won't let you down. See that you don't. Now go. Tell her what we've discussed. She'll be upstairs wearing a hole in the floor with her pacing. Nathan climbed the stairs to the apartment, his heart hammering. He knocked softly on the door, and Juliet yanked it open immediately, her face anxious. Well, she demanded. He said yes, to courting you properly. 3 months, and then if he's satisfied, I can ask for your hand officially. Juliet threw her arms around his neck with a cry of joy, and Nathan lifted her off her feet, spinning her around in the narrow hallway. When he set her down, they were both laughing, and he kissed her again, longer this time, pouring all his love and relief and joy into it. 3 months, she said when they broke apart. That's not so long. Not long at all, Nathan agreed. Not when it ends with you becoming my wife. The next 3 months passed in a blur of happiness, unlike anything Nathan had ever experienced. He continued his Tuesday and Thursday morning baking lessons, but now they felt different, charged with the knowledge that this was building toward something permanent. He came to Sunday dinners at the Zimmerman apartment above the bakery, where Jakob grilled him about his plans, his finances, his character. Nathan was honest about everything. He had saved nearly $500 from his dock work, a substantial sum that he'd been setting aside with a vague idea of eventually buying property. He had skills, references, a reputation for hard work and reliability. He had ambition too, though not for power or fame. He wanted a family, a home, a life of meaning and purpose. "What will you do when you and Juliet marry?" Jakob asked one Sunday evening in December as they sat by the fire after dinner. Juliet was in the kitchen, cleaning up, though Nathan knew she was listening. "That depends on several things, sir," Nathan said carefully. "What Juliet wants primarily, what opportunities present themselves, what you need from us." "I am not getting younger," Jakob said bluntly. "My back hurts more each year. My hands are not as steady. The bakery is successful, but it requires long hours, hard work. I had hoped. When this baker from Sacramento made his offer, I had hoped it would mean security for Juliet, someone to eventually take over the business so I could rest." "I can do that," Nathan said quietly. "If you'll teach me the parts I don't know yet. I'm a quick learner and I'm not afraid of hard work. I could work the docks in the afternoon and evening after the morning baking is done and bring in extra income until the bakery can fully support us all." Jakob studied him thoughtfully. "That would be a brutal schedule." "For a while, yes, but not forever. Once I've learned everything and we've built up enough savings, I could leave the docks, focus on the bakery, maybe even expand it. Juliet has ideas about a pastry shop. Perhaps that could become part of the business, a specialty section. You've discussed this with her, some of it. But I wanted to talk to you first, sir. This is your business, your legacy. I wouldn't dream of making plans for it without your input." Jakob nodded slowly. "You respect tradition, hierarchy. That is good. But you also listen to new ideas, to Juliet's dreams. That is also good. Perhaps together, you and she could build something even better than what I have created." From the kitchen, Nathan heard the soft sound of dishes being set down, and then Juliet appeared in the doorway, her eyes bright. "Do you mean that, Papa?" "Come here, daughter," Jakob said, and she crossed to kneel beside his chair. He put a weathered hand on her head, a gesture of blessing. "I mean it. I have been too afraid of change, too worried about holding on to what I built. But maybe it's time to let go a little, to trust that the next generation can carry things forward in their own way." "You'll always be the master baker," Juliet said, her voice thick with emotion. "This will always be your bakery, Papa." "No," Jakob said gently. "It will be our bakery. Yours and Nathan's and mine, all of us working together, if that's what you both want." "It is," Nathan said firmly. "If you'll have me as a partner, sir, I'd be honored." They spent the rest of the evening discussing details, making plans. Nathan would give his notice at the docks, but work through the end of the year to save as much as possible. In the new year, 1873, he would begin working at the bakery full-time, learning the remaining aspects of the business he hadn't yet mastered. The wedding would take place in March, giving them time to prepare and for Nathan to prove he could handle the work. Christmas that year was the happiest Nathan could remember. He exchanged gifts with Juliet and Jakob, receiving from them a beautiful leather-bound journal for writing down recipes and baking notes, and giving them a framed photograph he'd commissioned of himself, so they would always have his image once he joined the family. It was still a novelty, these photographs, expensive but worth it for the joy on Juliet's face when she unwrapped it. "You look so serious," she teased, studying the image. "The photographer said I had to hold still for 30 seconds, Nathan explained. It was hard not to smile, thinking about why I was having it taken. She kissed his cheek. "I love it. I'll treasure it always." January brought cold winds and rain, and Nathan threw himself into learning the business side of the bakery. Jakob taught him about ordering supplies, managing accounts, dealing with difficult customers. Nathan continued to improve his baking skills, and he found he genuinely enjoyed the work. There was something satisfying about starting each day in the warm bakery, creating food that would nourish and delight people throughout San Francisco. He and Juliet made their wedding plans during quiet moments, stolen between the morning rush and the afternoon preparations. They would marry at the small German Lutheran church Jakob attended, with a simple reception at the bakery afterward. Nothing fancy, but meaningful, surrounded by friends and the community that had supported the Zimmerman family through good times and bad. "Are you certain you want this life?" Juliet asked him one February morning as they rolled out dough for Danish pastries. "It's not glamorous, Nathan. Early mornings, hot kitchens, flour everywhere. We'll smell like bread and sugar all the time." Nathan looked up from his work and smiled at her. "Juliet, I could be shoveling coal in the rain and I'd be happy as long as I was doing it with you. But as it happens, I love this. I love the rhythm of the work, the creativity, the satisfaction of making something good with my own hands. And I love working beside you, seeing your skill, learning from you every day. This isn't settling for me. This is everything I want." She smiled back, that radiant smile that still made his heart skip. "Good, because Papa is already planning to take fewer hours once we're married. He wants to spend his mornings fishing, can you imagine? He says he's earned some leisure time." "He has," Nathan agreed, "and we'll make sure he gets it." The 3 months passed, and at the end of February, with Jakob's full blessing, Nathan officially asked Juliet to marry him. He did it properly, with a ring he'd saved for months to buy, a simple gold band with a small garnet stone the color of cherry pie filling. They were in the bakery, naturally, in the quiet hour after closing when the late afternoon light slanted through the front windows. "Juliet Zimmerman," he said, getting down on one knee amid the flour-dusted floor. "You've taught me to bake, but more importantly, you've taught me what it means to love someone fully as a partner and equal. You've shown me that strength and gentleness can exist together, that dreams are worth pursuing even when they're difficult. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life working beside you, building something beautiful together?" "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, absolutely yes." He slipped the ring on her finger, and she pulled him to his feet and kissed him with a passion that made him dizzy. They held each other there in the quiet bakery, surrounded by the tools of her trade that had become his trade too, and Nathan felt complete in a way he never had before. Their wedding day, March 15, 1873, dawned clear and bright, unusual for San Francisco that time of year. The church was packed with people from the neighborhood, customers from the bakery, dock workers Nathan had befriended, Mrs. Henderson and the boarders from her house. Jakob walked Juliet down the aisle, tears streaming openly down his face, and placed her hand in Nathan's with a solemnity that spoke of both grief and joy. The ceremony was conducted in both German and English, honoring Jakob's heritage while acknowledging the language of their life in America. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Nathan kissed Juliet and heard the cheers of their community. And he knew he'd found not just a wife but a home. The reception at the bakery featured, naturally, the finest pastries and pies San Francisco had ever seen. Juliet and Nathan had spent the previous week baking, with help from Jacob, and even some of the customers who'd become friends. There was music, with a couple of Jacob's German friends playing accordion and fiddle, and dancing in the street outside the bakery, and so much joy that Nathan felt drunk on it. As the evening wore on and the celebration began to wind down, Nathan found himself standing with Juliet in the doorway of the bakery, watching their friends and family depart into the night. She leaned against him and he wrapped his arm around her waist, marveling that she was his wife now that this incredible woman had chosen him. "Happy?" she asked softly. "More than I knew it was possible to be," Nathan replied honestly. "You, completely." She turned to look up at him. "I can't wait to start our life together, Nathan. Really start it. All of it." They had rented a small house 2 streets over, just enough room for a couple starting out, and they walked there hand in hand as the fog rolled in and the city settled into nighttime quiet. Nathan carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing at the tradition, and then they were finally, blessedly alone together for the first time as husband and wife. The early months of their marriage were an adjustment, learning to live together, to navigate each other's habits and quirks. Nathan learned that Juliet hummed while she worked, that she read penny novels in the evening and had a weakness for sad stories. Juliet discovered that Nathan was an early riser even by Baker standards, that he wrote in his journal every night before bed, recording not just recipes but thoughts and observations about their life. They fell into a rhythm at the bakery. Nathan took over most of the bread baking, working with Jacob in the very early morning hours. Juliet focused on pastries and pies, and together they experimented with new offerings, adding Nathan's Wyoming-style fruit cobblers and Juliet's German-inspired strudels to the regular rotation. Business thrived, and Jacob gradually reduced his hours, spending his mornings fishing off the docks as he dreamed. That summer, Juliet began to feel ill in the mornings, and they realized with joy and some trepidation that she was pregnant. The baby would come in late winter or early spring of 1874, and they began to prepare, saving money, fixing up one of the rooms in their small house as a nursery. "Are you scared?" Juliet asked Nathan one night as they lay in bed, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "Terrified," he admitted, "and more excited than I've ever been. You, the same. I keep thinking about my mother, wishing she could be here to see this to help me through it." Nathan pulled her close. "She would be so proud of you, of everything you've accomplished, the woman you've become. And you have Mrs. Henderson and the neighbor women and me. You won't go through this alone." "I know," Juliet said. "I'm lucky. We're lucky." They were indeed lucky. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and though the morning sickness was difficult, Juliet worked in the bakery almost until the end, teaching Nathan more advanced techniques, making sure he could handle the pastries on his own if needed. Jacob doted on his daughter, insisting she rest more, and formed an unlikely friendship with Nathan as they worked together through the winter mornings. Their son was born on February 20, 1874, after a long but ultimately uncomplicated labor. They named him James Jacob Cole, honoring both Juliet's maiden name initial and her father. He was a healthy, red-faced, loud baby who quickly became the center of their universe. Nathan discovered that fatherhood was even more terrifying and wonderful than he'd anticipated. He learned to change diapers with the same careful precision. He brought to measuring ingredients, to walk the floor with a crying baby at midnight, to function on even less sleep than his baker's schedule usually required. But when James looked up at him with Juliet's honey-colored eyes, or when he felt the weight of his son sleeping on his chest, Nathan felt a love so fierce and protective it almost hurt. Juliet was a natural mother, patient and nurturing but also practical. She didn't pretend everything was easy, didn't hide her exhaustion or frustration when James was particularly fussy. But Nathan never once doubted her love for their son or her commitment to raising him well. As James grew from infant to toddler, the bakery continued to flourish. By 1876, they had enough success and savings that they were able to expand, adding the specialty pastry shop Juliet had dreamed of to the side of the original bakery. It was her domain, where she could be as creative and experimental as she wanted, crafting elaborate cakes for weddings and celebrations, delicate French pastries, chocolate confections that became famous throughout the city. Jacob officially retired that year, though he still came by most mornings to drink coffee and offer advice and dandle his grandson on his knee. He'd grown older, slower, but content in a way Nathan had never seen in those first wary months. The old baker trusted Nathan completely now, and the two men had developed a genuine friendship beyond their family connection. "You know," Jacob said one morning as they watched Juliet through the window, serving a customer with James on her hip, "when you first came asking to learn baking, I thought you were just another young man sniffing around my daughter. I almost sent you away. Why didn't you?" Nathan asked, curious. "Something about the way you looked at her, and the way she looked at you. I saw the same thing between my wife and me all those years ago. I thought, maybe I should not be so quick to dismiss this one. Maybe I should let fate play out." He paused, then added gruffly, "I am glad I did." "So am I, sir, so am I." The years continued to pass, marked by the steady rhythm of the bakery's work and their family's growth. A daughter arrived in 1878, named Helena after Juliet's mother, with her father's dark hair and a serious, watchful expression even as a baby. 2 years later, another son, called Wilhelm for Jacob's father, who had died before making the journey to America. Their house grew too small, and they bought a larger one, still close to the bakery but with room for their expanding family, and a real yard where the children could play. Nathan proved as devoted a father as he was a husband and baker, spending his afternoons with the children while Juliet handled the afternoon rush at the shops, then trading off so she could have time with them while he prepared for the next morning's work. On Sundays, they still made a point of having family dinners, now at their house rather than the small apartment above the bakery. Friends joined them, Mrs. Henderson, who'd become like a grandmother to their children, some of the regular bakery customers who'd become dear friends, other merchants from their street who'd become trusted neighbors, and always there was pie. It had become Nathan's specialty over the years, his tribute to the thing that had first brought them together. He experimented constantly, trying new combinations of fruits and spices, perfecting his technique until his pies were considered as good as Juliet's, which she said was impossible but which he chose to believe. One Sunday in the spring of 1882, as they prepared for dinner, Nathan realized it had been exactly 10 years since he'd first tasted one of Juliet's pies at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house. He mentioned this to Juliet as they worked side by side in their kitchen, and she stopped what she was doing to look at him with wonder. 10 years. It feels like forever and no time at all. "I know what you mean," Nathan said. "Sometimes I look at you and I'm still that lonely dock worker, unable to believe someone as wonderful as you might look twice at me. And then I look at our children, at the life we've built, and I'm amazed all over again. You asked me for the recipe, Juliet said suddenly, smiling at the memory. "That first day I invited you to the bakery, you said you wanted to learn to make pie. I think I knew even then that you were different from the others. Who asks for the recipe? Everyone just wants to eat the pie and be done." "I wanted to understand it," Nathan remembered. "I wanted to understand what made it so special. Turns out it wasn't just the ingredients or the technique, it was you. It was the love you baked into it, the care, the attention. That's what made it extraordinary." She crossed to him and kissed him softly. "You always knew exactly what to say." "Only because I mean it." Their dinner that afternoon was particularly festive. Jakob was there, now 71 years old and moving slowly but still sharp as ever. Mrs. Henderson came, leaning on a cane but smiling broadly. Their children raced around the house. James, now 8 and already showing an interest in baking. Helena, at 4, proving to be as stubborn and determined as her mother. Little Wilhelm, just 2 and into everything. After dinner, as had become tradition, Nathan brought out the pie he'd made that morning. It was apple, the same as that very first one Juliet had brought to the boarding house a decade ago. He sliced it carefully, serving everyone, and when they all raised their forks in unison, he felt a wave of gratitude so powerful it nearly overwhelmed him. This was everything he'd never known he wanted. A family, a home, meaningful work, a community that valued and supported them. And at the center of it all, Juliet. His wife, his partner, his best friend, the love of his life. As if reading his thoughts, she caught his eye across the table and smiled, that same radiant smile that had first captured his heart. And in that moment, with their children laughing and their friends gathered close, and the taste of perfect pie on his tongue, Nathan Cole knew he was the luckiest man who ever lived. The years ahead would bring challenges, of course. No life is without difficulties. But they would face them together, side by side, with the same partnership and devotion that had carried them through everything so far. The bakery would continue to thrive, their children would grow, and through it all, there would be love and laughter and pie every Sunday. Jakob lived to see all 3 of his grandchildren grow past childhood, passing peacefully in his sleep in 1888 at the age of 77. He died knowing his daughter was happy, his business secure, and his legacy assured. They mourned him deeply, but celebrated a life well lived. And Nathan made sure their children knew their grandfather's stories, his wisdom, his fierce love for family. As the 1880s gave way to the 1890s, Nathan and Juliet found themselves becoming the elder generation. James, showing his father's talent for baking and his mother's creative vision, began to take on more responsibility in the bakery. Helena surprised everyone by showing a head for numbers and business management, and Wilhelm proved to have a gift for dealing with customers and suppliers. "We're building something that will last," Juliet said one evening as she and Nathan sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint San Francisco's hills in shades of gold and rose. They were both in their 40s now, with silver threading through their hair and laugh lines around their eyes, but Nathan still thought she was the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. "Because of you," Nathan said. "Because you were brave enough to tell me how you felt that day, to risk your heart. I think about that sometimes, what my life would have been if you hadn't, if I'd been too afraid to ask for baking lessons, or if you'd married that baker from Sacramento." "I don't like to think about that," Juliet said, shuddering. "This is the life I was meant to live, I'm certain of it, with you, with our children, with this work we do together." "Still," Nathan persisted, "I'm grateful every day that you took that chance, that we both did." She leaned against him, her head on his shoulder in a gesture that had become automatic over their years together. "It wasn't really a chance though, was it? It felt inevitable somehow, like all the pieces were just waiting to fall into place. Fate, maybe. Or maybe just two people who were paying attention, who recognized something good when they found it. By the turn of the century, Nathan and Juliet had become San Francisco institutions in their own way. Their bakery and pastry shop were landmarks, places where generations of families had celebrated life's milestones. They'd made cakes for weddings and christenings, provided bread for funerals and festivals, created memories flavored with butter and sugar and love. Their children all married and started their own families. James took over the main bakery operations, bringing his own innovations while respecting the traditions his grandfather and parents had established. Helena married a banker and kept the business accounts, making smart investments that secured the family's financial future. Wilhelm opened a second location across town, expanding the Zimmerman coal legacy. And through it all, Nathan and Juliet continued their Sunday tradition. Every week without fail, they made pie together, working side by side in their home kitchen now rather than the bakery. Their grandchildren would gather around the table, waiting impatiently for their slices, and Nathan would tell them the story of how he'd fallen in love with their grandmother over pie. "Tell us about the first pie, Grandpa," they'd chorus, even though they'd heard the story 100 times. And Nathan would describe that foggy Sunday morning in 1872, the way Juliet had walked into Mrs. Henderson's boarding house carrying an apple pie, the way his whole life had changed in that instant. He'd tell them about learning to bake, about asking for the recipe as a way to spend more time with her, about how that simple request had led to everything good in his life. "The secret to a good pie," he'd say, "is the same as the secret to a good life. Quality ingredients, careful attention, patience, and love, but most of all, love." In 1906, the great San Francisco earthquake struck, devastating the city. The original bakery building was damaged, though thankfully not beyond repair. The family rallied, working together to rebuild, and in the process, they modernized and expanded, emerging stronger than before. Nathan and Juliet, now in their 50s, were too old for the hardest physical work, but they provided leadership and encouragement, drawing on decades of experience to guide their children and grandchildren through the crisis. They opened their home to neighbors who'd lost theirs, provided bread free to anyone who needed it in the days after the quake, and showed the same generosity of spirit that had always characterized their business. "This is what we do," Juliet said simply, when someone praised their kindness. "We bake bread. We feed people. It's not charity, it's what we're meant to do." The city rebuilt, and so did they. The new bakery was better than the old, with modern ovens and more space. But they kept the name painted on the window just as it had always been. Zimmerman's Bakery and Cole's Pastry Shop, honoring both family names and the partnership that had created something lasting. As they moved into their 60s, Nathan and Juliet finally began to slow down. They came to the bakery less frequently, trusting their capable children and grandchildren to carry on the work. They took walks together through the city they'd called home for so long, attended church on Sundays, entertained friends and family in their parlor. And they still made pie every Sunday, though now it was just for themselves and whoever might drop by. Nathan's hands were less steady than they'd been, and Juliet's back ached after too much standing, but they could still create magic together, still produce crusts that flaked perfectly and fillings that sang with flavor. "You remember what you asked me that day?" Juliet said one Sunday in 1920 as they worked together in their kitchen. They were both 70 now, married nearly 50 years, and their love had only deepened with time. "Which day?" Nathan asked, though he thought he knew. The day you finally asked for my hand along with the recipe. You'd been learning from me for months, coming every Tuesday and Thursday morning, showing up at Sunday dinners. And then one day, after Papa gave his blessing, you asked me officially. Do you remember what you said? I said I wanted to spend the rest of my life working beside you, building something beautiful together. And have you? She asked, her honey-colored eyes still bright despite the wrinkles around them. Have I made you happy, Nathan? He set down the rolling pin and took both her flour-dusted hands in his. Juliet Cole, you have made me happier than I ever dreamed possible. You gave me a family, a purpose, a life full of meaning. You taught me that love isn't just a feeling. It's a choice we make every day in 1,000 small ways. And I would choose you all over again, every single time. Tears slipped down her cheeks, and he gently wiped them away with his thumbs, just as he'd done countless times over their decades together. I love you, she said. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. And I love you, always and forever. They finished the pie together, their movements synchronized after so many years of partnership, and when it came out of the oven golden and perfect, they sat together at their kitchen table and each ate a slice, savoring not just the flavor but the memories, the history, the love baked into every bite. Their children and grandchildren arrived later for Sunday dinner, as had become tradition. The house filled with noise and laughter, with the chaos of small children and the warmth of family bonds, and Nathan looked around at everything they'd created together, not just children and grandchildren, but a legacy of kindness and hard work and love, and felt a peace so profound, it was almost holy. This was what life was meant to be. Not grand adventures or dramatic gestures, but daily commitment, steady partnership, the accumulation of small moments of joy into a lifetime of contentment. It was working together in the quiet morning hours, sharing dreams and fears and hopes. It was supporting each other through grief and celebrating together in triumph. It was choosing, every single day, to see the best in each other and to be the best version of themselves. As the evening wound down and their family departed, calling out goodbyes and thanks and promises to visit again soon, Nathan and Juliet stood together on their porch, hand in hand as they'd stood so many times before. Another good Sunday, Juliet said contentedly. The best, Nathan agreed. Though I say that every week. That's because every week with you is the best, she teased, leaning against him. They stood there as darkness fell over San Francisco, wrapped in each other's arms, and Nathan thought about that young man he'd been nearly 50 years ago. That lonely dock worker who'd tasted a perfect pie and fallen in love with the woman who made it. Who'd had the courage to ask for the recipe and eventually for her hand, and who'd been rewarded with a lifetime of happiness beyond measure. The secret, he'd learned, was simple. Love was like baking. It required quality ingredients, respect, trust, friendship, passion. It required careful attention, patience, willingness to learn and grow. It required work, daily work, the choice to show up even when it was difficult. And it required the willingness to share yourself completely, to be vulnerable, to create something together that neither could create alone. But most of all, it required choosing the right partner. Someone who would work beside you, who would teach you and learn from you, who would laugh with you and cry with you, who would build a life with you based on shared values and mutual devotion. Nathan had found that partner in Juliet Zimmerman, now Juliet Cole, his wife of nearly 50 years. She had given him everything: love, family, purpose, home. And in return, he had given her the same, supporting her dreams, celebrating her talents, standing beside her through every challenge and triumph. They would have a few more good years together, growing old gracefully, surrounded by the family they'd created and the community they'd served. When Nathan passed peacefully in his sleep in 1924 at the age of 76, Juliet held his hand and whispered that she'd see him again someday, and that she'd bring pie when she did. She followed him 2 years later, dying quietly in her chair while watching the sunset over San Francisco, the city they'd called home for over 50 years. Her children found her with a peaceful smile on her face, and on the table beside her, a photograph of Nathan from their courtship days, and a handwritten recipe card for apple pie in her distinctive script. The bakery continued, run by their children and grandchildren, and eventually their great-grandchildren. The recipes were passed down, along with the stories. How Nathan Cole had come to San Francisco as a lonely cowboy and found love in the most unexpected place. How Juliet Zimmerman had seen something special in him and been brave enough to risk her heart. How a simple request for a pie recipe had led to a lifetime of partnership, love, and happiness. And every Sunday, in homes throughout San Francisco and beyond, their descendants made pie together, remembering the lesson Nathan and Juliet had taught through their lives. That the sweetest things in life are meant to be shared, that love is built through daily devotion, and that sometimes asking for the recipe is really asking for forever. Their story became family legend, told and retold, each generation adding their own memories and perspectives, but always returning to the core truth. Love, real and lasting love, is possible. It requires courage to pursue it, commitment to maintain it, and the wisdom to recognize it when it appears. But for those brave enough and patient enough and devoted enough, it offers rewards beyond measure. The bakery still stands in San Francisco, now in its 5th generation of family ownership. On the wall, there's a framed photograph of Nathan and Juliet from their 50th wedding anniversary, standing together in front of the bakery, hands clasped, faces lined with age but eyes bright with love. And beneath it, a simple plaque that reads, "Built on love, sustained by dedication, sweetened by pie." It is, perhaps, the most fitting epitaph for a life well lived and a love story for the ages. A cowboy and a baker's daughter, brought together by pie and bound together by choice, proving that sometimes the simplest beginnings lead to the most extraordinary endings. Their love story wasn't dramatic in the traditional sense. There were no grand rescues or sweeping declarations made in moments of crisis. Instead, it was built on the foundation of daily kindness, mutual respect, shared work, and steady devotion. It was proven not in a single moment but in thousands of moments, accumulating over decades into something unshakable and eternal. And that, perhaps, is the greatest love story of all. Not the passionate flame that burns bright and quick, but the steady warmth that sustains through all seasons, through all challenges, through all the years of a life shared completely. Nathan and Juliet Cole understood this, lived it, and left it as their legacy to everyone who came after. In the end, Nathan had asked for the recipe and for her hand, but what Juliet had given him was so much more. She'd given him a home, a purpose, a family, and a love that lasted not just until death but beyond it, living on in the memories and lives and hearts of everyone they'd touched. And every Sunday, somewhere in San Francisco, someone makes pie using Juliet's recipe, passed down through generations. They measure flour and cut butter and roll dough and fill crusts with fruit, and maybe they think about love, about partnership, about the courage it takes to ask for what you want and the grace it takes to give it freely. The pie comes out of the oven perfect, golden and fragrant, and it tastes like home, like love, like forever. just as it did that first Sunday morning in 1872, when a lonely cowboy tasted heaven and found his future in the hands of a baker's daughter who saw something in him worth nurturing. That is their story. That is their legacy. And it endures, sweet and sustaining as the pie that brought them together, as lasting and nourishing as the love they built together. One day, one choice, one moment at a time, until those moments accumulated into a lifetime of perfect, hard-won, deeply cherished happiness.